And now, marine weather around Alaska. Let's take a look at the Alaska marine weather coming up here for the end of the week into the early weekend. I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan on this Thursday afternoon, November 30th. The sea ice will be growing by this time next week. We are going to have temperatures cool down across especially the western areas of the mainland this weekend, closer to normal. But there are signs on some of the forecast models as we head out through the middle and latter part of next week. A stronger cold front's going to come out of Siberia with some Arctic air, some of the coldest air we've seen so far early this late fall, early winter season. And that's going to spread across areas of the west and southwest by the time we get into Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of next week. So we should see some pretty good ice growth coming up here by around this time next week. But in the meantime, we have to get by this string of low pressure systems kind of on an extended front or trough. Late tonight into early Friday, there'll be a low pressure just south of the central Gulf in the North Pacific, another low north of the eastern Aleutians, and then another one back toward the western Aleutians. And as this feature works its way eastward, it'll weaken on Friday. The other one coming into Bristol Bay, and then the other one out here still back toward the western Aleutians. None of these are particularly strong, but we can anticipate a couple of lows are going to push up into the Panhandle with some additional light to moderate rain and snow as we go through the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. But a stronger low will be lifting out of the North Pacific up into the Gulf on Monday and Tuesday of next week, and that'll have more in the way of high winds along with some moderate to heavier precipitation along the Gulf Coast and areas of the Panhandle early next week. So that'll be the next primary weather maker, followed by that low. Once that gets up in the Gulf later Monday and Tuesday, we're going to see a stronger cold front coming off of Siberia, crossing the northern central Bering Sea and pushing colder air in along the west and southwest coast. So get ready for that change coming up as well. And overall, we are going to see temperatures get below normal for a change, especially across the southwestern half of the mainland by the time we get into later next week and next weekend. But in the meantime, just kind of cooling down closer to normal, especially western mainland this weekend. Now, winds across the inner channels on Friday, we're looking at southeast winds, Ketchikan, Metlakatla, 25 knots, waves as high as 9-10 feet there, Dixon Entrance. Northeast winds 20 knots, 3-4 foot waves there, Stevens Passage on up through Lynn Canal. The outer coast within 15 nautical miles, the nearshore forecast has easterly winds 25 to 30 knots, gust as high as 40 knots. From the southeast, they're just near and south of Craig, waves 15, 16 feet. Northeast winds 20 to 25 knots there out of Yakutat Bay, as well as Cape Suckling with 12 to 14 foot waves. For Saturday, winds will be southeast 15 to 20 knots from the middle, lower inner channels there, waves 3 to 6 feet. North winds 15 knots with 3 foot waves there in Lynn Canal. Sitka, south through Craig, look for south winds to 20 knots in the nearshore waters and waves 14 to as high as 17 feet. Easterly winds west of Gustavus, southwest there of Yakutat Bay at 20 to 25 knots and 10 to 13 foot waves. For the northwest corner of the Gulf, generally northeasterly winds across the region, 20 knots there within Prince William Sound, Upper Cook Inlet, 3 foot waves within Prince William Sound. Those winds increase to 25 knots off the eastern Kenai, lower Cook Inlet, and just northeast there of Kodiak Island with waves 7-8 feet at the entrance of Cook Inlet, 10 to 12 feet though off of Kodiak Island and the east side of the Kenai. And then winds on Saturday will generally continue northeasterly, 20 knots within Prince William Sound, 4 foot waves, 15 knot winds, Upper Cook Inlet, 3-4 foot waves, 25 knot northeasterly winds, middle lower Cook Inlet waves around 6 feet, and then waves running 8-9 feet off of the Kenai coastline there in the far northwest corner of the Gulf. Around Kodiak Island, a mix of winds northeast within Shelikof Strait, northwesterly off of Akiak at 20 knots, waves 5 to as high as 20 feet as you get well off of Kodiak Island. Now along the North Pacific side, look for Southwest winds 25 to 30 knots, especially Sandpoint to False Pass, with waves 7 to as high as 12 feet. East winds 10 knots within Bristol Bay, because they're going to have that weak low circulation in this area here, just on the Bering side of the peninsula. Southwest winds up to 35 knots there, just to the northwest of Cold Bay, with 13-foot waves. And then winds and waves should come down across the entire region on Saturday. Look for north winds 15 to 20 knots across Kodiak Island. 4-foot waves within Shelikof Strait. For the Alaska Peninsula, we'll say northwest winds, west to northwest winds 15 knots, middle upper peninsula, but southwest winds 15 knots. Waves generally 4 to 6 feet on the North Pacific side, 7 to as high as 9 feet on the Bering side. The Aleutian chain Friday will see west to southwest winds generally 30 knots. But a bit more southwest to west with 35 to 40 knot gales south and west of Kiska. Waves will generally be running 15 to 19 feet on the Bering side, on the North Pacific side of the eastern and central Aleutians, and 10 to maybe as high as 14, 15 feet on the Bering side. For Saturday, winds going to be southwesterly 15 to 20 knots eastern and central Aleutian, shifting west-northwest and increasing to 30 to 35 knots west of Kiska. Waves generally running 7 to maybe as high as 12 feet south of Adak and Atka. And then look for waves of 6 to 8 feet on the Bering side across the eastern and central Aleutians. Along areas of the southwest coast, east wind Bristol Bay 20 knots, northeast wind 15 knots out of Kuskokwim Bay, waves right around 3-4 feet. Northeast winds 20 to 25 knots, St. Matthew to St. Paul, waves around 13 feet. And then out of Norton Sound and along the lower Yukon Delta, northeast winds 10 to 15 knots and waves running near 3 feet. For Saturday, winds will be northwesterly within Kuskokwim Bay, 4-foot waves, westerly 15 knots within Bristol Bay, 4 or 5-foot waves there. Northeast to north winds turning northwesterly through Etolan Strait at as much as 15 to 20 knots out of Norton Sound up through about Hooper Bay, with waves of 3 to 4 feet. And then finally, looking at the northern areas in the Bering Strait, winds will be out of the north 25 to 30 knots around and south of the Bering Strait, with waves of 5 to 8 feet. Lower Chukchi Sea, northeasterly winds, especially off of Point Lay down through Point Hope at 20 knots with 4 to 5-foot waves. Fair amount of ice in place here along the far north Arctic coast, with east-southeast winds at 10 to 15 knots. On Saturday, winds will be east to northeast 15 to 20 knots along the Arctic coast, Kakhovik to Utqiagvik. And then look for east to northeast winds anywhere from 10 to 20 knots down along the Chukchi Sea coastline, with waves of 2 to 4 feet in areas of ice continuing to grow. And then down through the Bering Strait and off of the west side of the Seward Peninsula, winds will be out of the northeast at 20 to 25 knots, with waves running generally 4 to 6 feet.